Stand by. This is Whitetail Brief, tactical deer hunting insights in 20 minutes or less.
What's up, everyone? I'm your host, Aaron Hepler. Let's cut the fluff, hit the tactics, and get you closer to your next whitetail. All right. Welcome back to the InCamp Whitetail Brief. I'm Aaron Hepler, your host. Today, we have no guests. I am solo, and I am here to tell you that today, I'm wearing an orange hat. And you know, in bow season in Pennsylvania, we don't need to wear orange. So you're right. It means I'm going bird hunting as soon as I'm done this. And the reason is I was fortunate to be able to harvest I hate that word. I was able to kill a public land whitetail buck. And he's not a giant, but I am super proud of him. I'm super happy for the way that it happened. It's a cool story. So I'm just going to dive right into talking about whitetails this year. The amount of movement, even Penn State's published a study, has been very poor, especially with does, and that generally is equaling a poor amount of movement in bucks. I think what we're going to end up seeing is this giant spike because things are going to start to go a little haywire in the next week. It seems like everything's about a week and a half late. Scrapes really weren't being opened until the end of the proverbial scrape week. So we weren't seeing a lot of that. But what I'm going to say is if you're having a tough time, better times are coming, and there's still plenty of deer. I don't know. In Pennsylvania, we can do some spotting and that kind of thing, and people are seeing plenty of deer at night. It's a kind of fun activity. Take your kids, get some hot cocoa, and go shine a light in some fields. It's a lot of fun. My kid loves it. So I'm going to just dive into this story. We're going to tell it. I also want you to know that InCamp Whitetail Brief will be back next year. I'm going to do a couple more episodes, but we're going to wrap it up at the end of November. So there's going to be 2 more episodes following this one. And then we're going to be doing something a little bit different. And I'll tell you about that a little later. So 2025, this has been kind of a fun year for me. I did that bear hunt in New Jersey. And that was a blast. Didn't kill anything there, but did have some encounters, and it was a lot of fun hanging out with that camp. So thanks to those guys for having me, Mitchell Shirk and Jason Miller and Mark and Mike Lesher. Those guys were great. So it was a lot of fun being in camp with those guys, talking about, telling stories about bears at night. It was a good time. So what I'll say about this hunt this year is I struggled in all my normal spots, and I think I did a pretty poor job of not of scouting. I do plenty of that, but what I did do was I hunted a lot off of memory, and you want to try to use trail cameras not as a crutch, and I know I do that. We set out cameras, and there was plenty of deer sign prior to the season in the areas. In fact, there was more deer sign early on than we ever see in some of our really good spots. And I'm talking about as in me and my hunting partner that I hunt with the most in this area. So we were noticing that there wasn't really a lot of camera activity. And even though there wasn't a lot of camera activity, we were like, you know what? There's more room around them than there is on them. So we need to hunt those areas in the historical times that deer have shown up in those areas. And we always kind of want to be on the cusp of right when they get there because it's the best time. And we just kept striking out, either blanking or only seeing a deer or two, and nothing legal, nothing in range. So we kind of did a little digging, ended up going a little haywire and doing in-season scouting. And you might think that, hey, this is kind of like you're bouncing around and you're not thinking, but what my goal was to find the freshest. So there's no food on the tops of almost any ridges. And there is some in the mid-range section. There's some acorns and that kind of thing. But most importantly, you're looking for the type of security cover that they need because it's ending up trumping food at this point in time because deer are really focused on, kind of the lighter food sources, a lot of like grass, greens, that kind of thing. So, because it's been a warm season. So I ended up taking a lot of preseason drives with my wife on date nights. And we ended up just kind of learning a lot about what the deer were doing in this area, what they're relating to. And it made me think, getting into the season, hey, there's a couple areas that I don't really need to hike in super far to hang a camera and see what's going on in this area. But when you do that in season, remember that especially if you're hanging a regular SD card camera, you're getting in there and you're seeing what the sign is. So I spent some time just getting off the access, not very far, 5-10 minute hikes off the access, and checking some stuff out, hanging a camera, and gathering some information that way. So what I was finding is you jump into a spot and either immediately find sign, or maybe, like I said, a 5 or 10 minute hike in, you'd find some good sign, hang a camera. That was the edge of where things were getting good. So those cameras were pretty easy to check on my way in and way out of anywhere. So you could do a quick, hey, check that. Is that sign still active? Is it getting pounded more? Like, there was a couple areas where I would find a scrape, and hey, is there new dirt on top of the leaves? Did that scrape get bigger? And I was finding that, yeah, I was getting some small bucks and some does, hitting some scrapes and opening those things up more. And although those pictures were at night, I was learning they were kind of on the fringes, and I didn't really have to go that much further to be able to figure out where deer were moving. So just a lot of in-season scouting. But there was one spot in particular that I had learned some things about early on. And because of my curiosity later in the season, because of my curiosity in the beginning of the season, I had sent a friend in one of those areas, and he had a pretty good hunt, had an encounter with a good buck, and we decided, like, hey, um, maybe that would be a good place to hang a camera. Well, I I I still kind of wrote it off, and I shouldn't have. So I ended up putting a camera in there and periodically checking it over, 2 or 3 weeks, taking the 5 or 10 minute thing. And like I said, it was a lot of night pictures, some stuff close to the fringes of daylight. But as we're approaching scrape week and we're getting into the pre-rut, that type of thing, I thought, you know what? I'm gonna just throw a morning sit at this. The deer are showing up on this camera 10 minutes before daylight now, and I'm only, not, I'm 10 minutes into a hike, so maybe quarter mile, half mile, whatever it was. So I'm thinking this is a lot closer than what I normally do, and this, it makes for pretty easy. So what I did that I thought was key to this, though, is I was noticing that there were does moving out of the area around 4 a.m., between 4 and 5 a.m. And then there were deer coming back in, most of the time bucks that were coming back in around 6:30 a.m. to 7 a.m. So I thought, you really have to be careful with when you're getting in there. I can't really be earlier than 5:30, and I can't be later. I can't be set later than 6:30. So I ended up getting to the area around 5:45, hiked in. It took me about 15, 20 minutes to hike in, and I knocked an arrow at 6:30, and sent my wife a text, hey, I'm safe, everything's good. Gotta do the due diligence there. And I just kind of enjoyed watching the woods wake up that morning. It wasn't really cold as normal. It was like, 40, 45 degrees, and sun started coming up, and shooting light in our time zone was 7:04 a.m. And at 7:05, I saw antlers coming. And at 7:06, I decided that deer's wide enough. He's got some points. Here we have a 3-point antler restriction. I was like, he's got enough points. It's still that kind of like gray light. And I'm like, man, I can barely see my pins. But this deer was coming and coming fast. So I drew my bow, I said, if he gets to that, 15, 20 yard, I couldn't shoot 30 yards by any means. It was too dark to be able to see. It was still too dim light to be able to see any type of branches and that kind of thing. So he ended up making it to 15 yards, and I settled my pin where I thought, his heart was. And I took some deep breaths, and I could see my pin fairly well at that point, 706, and I let one fly, and I heard a crack, and he jumped about 4 times, and I thought, "Oh no, like I missed, like I hit a rock," and I'm kind of like looking for him to just be kind of doing the one of those standing around, looking around to see what happened kind of thing, and just start walking away. And next thing you know, I see this drunk deer just doing circles, and he toppled over in about 20 yards, and I was so elated. This was my 20th sit for the season. And the one cool thing to me is I got to give my wife some kudos. She puts up with a lot of stuff, and every time she puts a little knowledge, I think it's because maybe she's removed from it a little bit and she can think a little more clearly, but she kept being like, "You should hang a camera in that spot. You should hang a camera in that spot." And the one day we passed it and she's like, "You got a camera? Let's go hang it." And we we actually went in there and hung the camera together. And this deer, there were actually a couple nice deer that were showing up on the camera, and this deer was not one of them, but I couldn't have been happier with the story. And he honestly, he was almost 200 pounds dressed. So he was a pretty massive bodied deer. But you know, what's cool to me is I didn't really know anything about that area. I've never hunted it before. I've passed it and thought, I should walk around in there sometime or whatever. And the thing of it is there are times and a place for you to hunt the really, really good stuff. And when it's just not happening, man, you know, I I'm a pretty true believer in that if you just try something new, you're going to set yourself up for a lot of future success because you'll learn something about that spot. And remember, every hunting spot is cyclical, right? Eventually the cover gets too heavy, or well, too sparse, I should say, or, the food changes or the landscape changes and deer stop funneling through those areas. So you always have to kind of be a leg up on that journey. And I think one thing is I always do a really good job of scouting some kind of new spot in the spring, but then I end up not hunting it because I get stuck on thinking about, oh, we saw this big one here, we saw this there, and there's nothing wrong with keeping those spots that you've had in the past and checking them out. And like I said, our best spot this year prior to the season was absolutely loaded with sign, and we had great bucks on in September, August, that kind of thing, and it trickled off to almost nothing. So the important thing is that you do hunt these new spots. You make a point of it, especially now. It's kind of like, what do you have to lose? You're sitting in your good spots and nothing's happening, so you might as well just go check something out. But I'll tell you a few things that I found out about this spot that I was hunting. It set up. There were a few key things that helped me. It's set up perfectly for the wind. I could sit a north or any south wind above or below a trail and be good. I needed to be careful with thermals. So if I what I really needed to do was make sure there weren't any. So anything that was predicted to be over a 7-mile-an-hour wind really worked well in there, on a north or a south wind, because I had an east-west trail that the deer were using very consistently. There were a few scrapes in that area, and what I was really gathering, because of it being a very non-invasive camera, like I said, I only had to hike 10 minutes into this spot. Um, well, maybe, 15, 20 minutes into the spot to get to where this area was. It's pretty non-invasive because it was on the edge. So, um, I could check these scrapes real quick and see what was happening, not leave a lot of, ground scent or any intrusion. And based on what I was finding on the camera, nothing was bothered by the fact that I was checking the camera or checking the sign. The important thing is I noticed from the first time in there that these scrapes there was one really nice one and about 4 or 5 small scrapes. But what I was noticing every time I went in there was the big one got bowled out and the smaller ones got very large compared to what they were. So I was noticing that not only was there a big deer or a nice deer or two in there, what I was noticing that the whole deer herd was using it. I mean, does were hitting the licking branch, does were peeing in these scrapes. So that was really important to see the progress of the scrapes and see when they got the most attention. When I thought that they were at their peak of attention is when I decided to hunt them. So scrapes are always good for camera inventory and good areas to kind of narrow things down and hunt. But if you want your best opportunity at um, killing a buck at a scrape, the best time to do it is when the peak activity is at its most intense on that particular scrape. So I probably would have seen a lot of bucks that day had I waited, but I was not about to do that. So, so I'm ready to go bird hunting, guys. I was out the other day with my bird dog. We had 12 birds up, and it took me a while, but I finally killed the limit. He's getting pretty good at pointing, but it's still a growth type thing. So ended up pointing the last couple birds, and I finally killed our limit, a limit for the year. We've killed a couple, but I killed a limit for the year, so that was real cool. He was excited. I was excited. My wife is excited because she loves her some pheasant mushroom pasta. So I don't know. This was kind of fun. I enjoyed talking about that. If you've got questions about anything that you're doing in the deer woods and something seems to not be clicking, hit me up. But it's really time to just get creative. If you haven't, this is a really good time to be creative, I should say, because the deer are showing up at random times, at random places, on random winds. Honestly, the best thing to do is find an area where you think there's does, go sit downwind of where you think they're bedding or where they're traveling, and just sit there. And it doesn't really matter what time of day it is. So I hope you have a good wrap up to this bow season, especially if you are a fellow Pennsylvanian. If you need some help with creativity, feel free to reach out at InCamp_podcast on Instagram. You can DM me there or email me at incamppodcast@gmail.com. I'd be happy to talk to you guys. So this is my first and hopefully not very often solo episode. I don't really like solo episodes, I'm not going to lie, but hope you enjoyed. We'll talk to you soon. This is InCamp Podcast.